This is Denali, or Mount McKinley, depending on who you ask. But, regardless of what you call it, it's the highest mountain on the North American continent, as well as the deadliest. Over 130 lives have been lost on these slopes, with statistically one climber dying here on any given season. At just 20,310 feet, Denali's summit is nearly 9,000 feet shorter than Everest's. Yet with a success rate of just 52%, many elite mountaineers consider this the most physically demanding of the 7 summits. Today, we are mapping every treacherous step of the West Buttress route, from the deceptive calm of base camp to the deadly summit push. Before the ascent begins, it's crucial that every climber understands what makes this mountain fundamentally different from any other peak on Earth. Denali rises from the Alaska Range, a vast, glaciated wilderness mainly accessed by air. Each season, approximately 1,000 climbers attempt the summit, with expeditions typically lasting 14 to 21 days. A permit costs $450 per climber, and the season runs from late April through July. There are several established routes up the mountain, including the exposed West Rib, the technical Cassin Ridge, and the committing South Buttress. But 98% of all climbers choose the West Buttress route. It's far from the most technical line on the mountain, but that's exactly why it's the most deadly. The seemingly easy route lulls climbers into underestimating the mountain, with the majority of total fatalities occurring on this route. But the true difficulty of Denali isn't hidden in the grade of the climb, but rather the harsh environment in which it stands. For starters, Denali sits at a latitude of 63 degrees north, just south of the Arctic Circle, because the Earth's atmosphere is thinner at the poles than at the equator. The barometric pressure on Denali's summit is physiologically equivalent to standing an extra 3,000 feet higher than you would be in the Himalayas. And during severe low-pressure systems, that pressure drop can create a perceived altitude on the summit of over 24,000 feet. If Mount Everest were located at this latitude, its summit would be unclimbable without supplemental oxygen. And then there's the relentless self-sufficiency required for an attempt on Denali. On Everest, Sherpas and porters are the logistical backbone, carrying clients' tents, food, and oxygen. But on Denali, there is no help. You are responsible for every ounce of gear needed to survive for 3 weeks in the Arctic, and it's this physical grind that depletes your body's reserves long before you ever reach the technical sections of the mountain. Unlike the weeks of trekking required to reach Everest Base Camp, climbers board light aircraft in the oxygen-rich town of Talkeetna and are deposited directly onto the southeast fork of the Kahiltna Glacier after a jarring 45-minute flight. This rapid transition creates an immediate psychological disconnect. Mountaineers step off the plane into a fully glaciated, high alpine world without the physical exertion that usually prepares the body for altitude. And for those who arrive here, it quickly becomes apparent that it is a far stretch from Everest Base Camp. There are no heated dining tents or Sherpas waiting to chaperone clients. While Everest climbers might spend weeks at base camp acclimatizing, Denali teams spend very little time here. Tents are pitched hastily upon arrival, only to be torn down and packed again late that night or early the next morning. Departing base camp, the West Buttress route presents an immediate anomaly known as Heartbreak Hill. While the goal of mountaineering is to go up, your first move on Denali is a 600-foot descent. On the initial downhill leg, the feature presents little trouble, but the name reveals its true nature on the return journey. After 3 weeks on the mountain, when climbers are physically depleted and mentally drained, this final uphill slog to the extraction point is a soul-crushing last push. The descent of Heartbreak Hill deposits you onto the main Kahiltna Glacier, a vast, snowy highway that fosters a dangerous complacency. To the untrained eye, this area resembles a flat, snowy highway. But underneath this flat surface lie massive crevasses, some large enough to swallow a bus, and their structural integrity is entirely dependent on the temperature. Despite the freezing air, the high-latitude sun strikes the concave glacial valley like a parabolic reflector. Surface temperatures can soar to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, rapidly weakening the structural integrity. Deceived by the heat and the flat terrain, climbers often make a fatal mistake of crossing this section unroped. In a single week in 2017, 4 separate crevasse falls were reported here, all involving unroped climbers. The movement from base camp to Camp 1 is a slow and physically draining slog. A typical climber will carry a 50-pound backpack while dragging a sled loaded with another 60 to 80 pounds of gear. On flat ground, the sled glides, but on the side hills and undulations of the lower Kahiltna, the sled becomes an erratic weight. This physical struggle frequently results in non-climatic injuries, hip abrasions, strained backs, and profound muscular fatigue, which can degrade a climber's physical resolve long before the real challenge has even begun. From Camp 1, the route begins with a relentless, low-angle ascent known as Ski Hill. This section is psychologically grueling due to a distortion of scale. In the clear, thin air, landmarks such as Kahiltna Pass appear to be deceptively close, yet climbers can march for 5 hours without seemingly making any progress. The broad, featureless nature of Ski Hill also makes navigation treacherous in poor weather. When the cloud ceiling drops and merges with the snow surface, contrast vanishes entirely, and spatial awareness becomes increasingly difficult. In these conditions, survival depends on following flag markers, placed every 150 to 200 feet, mapping out the trail. In bad weather, if a wand is lost or buried by wind-drifted snow, a rope team can inadvertently wander into the chaotic crevasse fields that line the edges of the safe corridor. Camp 2, located at 11,000 feet, is a critical acclimatization milestone. Yet among guides and rangers, it possesses a dark reputation, often referred to as the Vortex. The camp sits in a meteorological compression zone. Cold, dense air draining off the high peaks collides with moist, warmer air masses pushing up the Kahiltna Glacier from the Gulf of Alaska. This collision forces moisture to condense rapidly, producing staggering amounts of snow. It's not uncommon for Camp 2 to be buried under 4 feet of snowfall in a single 24-hour period, and getting caught in bad conditions here can easily lead climbers to become trapped. In 1990, a Japanese team attempting a winter ascent became trapped in the Vortex by a relentless series of low-pressure systems. For nearly 20 days, they were pinned down, unable to ascend or retreat. Immediately upon leaving Camp 2, the climb quickly changes. The route attacks Motorcycle Hill, a steep 600-foot slope that serves as the gateway to the upper mountain. The 35-degree gradient here is steep enough that hauling a sled becomes not just a physical challenge, but now a technical one. Efficient movement requires a rhythmic, aggressive style that leaves many climbers gasping for air, with heart rates spiking in the thinning atmosphere. Above the hill lies the Polo Field, a broad plateau at 12,500 feet. While flat, this area is highly exposed to the prevailing westerlies, and climbers are often battered by winds accelerating over the ridges. And this exposure only increases as they reach Windy Corner at 13,500 feet. At this geological pinch point, the bulk of the West Buttress ridge forces air to squeeze around a rock prow. This creates a Venturi effect. As air is forced through this constriction, its velocity increases dramatically. Even on days when base camp is calm, Windy Corner can be blasted by 60 to 70 mile-per-hour winds. These winds scour the snow from the surface, leaving a polished sheen of hard, blue ice that demands precise crampon techniques. In recent years, a secondary, equally deadly hazard has emerged: rockfall. The cliffs above the corner are composed of loose, fractured granite held together by permafrost and ice. As summer temperatures rise, the binding ice melts, destabilizing the rock face. Rocks ranging from pebble-sized missiles to microwave-sized boulders rain down on the traverse. And if you're hit by one, the topography that creates the wind also makes rescue here near impossible. Helicopters cannot hover in the erratic, violent turbulence of the corner. Rounding the corner, climbers stumble into Denali Basin, a vast glacial amphitheater that houses the vitally important Camp 3. This is the advanced base camp of the West Buttress and a key hub of social and logistical activity on the mountain. The National Park Service maintains a seasonal camp here, often staffed by volunteer doctors and rescue personnel. It is the highest point on the mountain, with a semi-permanent medical capability. But even here, there is no safety. The basin is exposed to relentless storm conditions, so tents must be fortified by snow walls and sheltered from the worst of the wind. And at 14,200 feet, the physical challenge begins to intensify. Here, the barometric pressure is just 60% of sea level. This is the elevation where high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE, frequently manifests. In susceptible climbers, the lack of oxygen causes the pulmonary arteries to constrict, raising pressure in the lungs. Fluid leaks from the capillaries, effectively drowning climbers in their own fluids. As climbers leave the relative safety of Gannett Basin, they quickly encounter the technical crux of the West Buttress route, the headwall. This intimidating 2,000-foot wall of ice rises at gradients up to 50 degrees. To mitigate the risk of fatal falls on this steep terrain, the National Park and Guide Services maintain two parallel fixed lines. But even with ropes, the ascent of the headwall is often cited as one of the most physically grueling days of the expedition. For over an hour, climbers use a jumar to haul themselves up the rope while kicking the front points of their crampons into the hard ice. Cresting the headwall, you emerge onto the West Buttress Ridge itself, a transition that is both spectacular and terrifying. This knife-edge traverse, where the path is often only a boot width wide, stretches roughly 1,000 feet and has sheer drops on either side. At the end of the ridge lies High Camp, situated at 17,200 feet and renowned as one of the most inhospitable campsites in the world. At this altitude, High Camp is exposed to the full, unshielded force of the jet stream. Temperatures rarely rise above zero, and at night, they plunge to -30, while the physiological altitude felt here is often equivalent to 19,000 or 20,000 feet in the Himalayas. At this elevation, the body stops regenerating. It begins to consume its own muscle mass for energy. Appetite vanishes, and sleep is interrupted by the gasping reflex, a terrifying sensation where your brain forgets to breathe, forcing you to wake up lunging for air. Teams often spend days in these unfavorable conditions, waiting for a weather window to attempt the summit. The decision of when to make the final push, balancing the deteriorating physical state of the team against the forecast, is often the most critical decision of the entire expedition. When a weather window finally presents itself, teams begin the grueling 14-hour push to the summit, and the day begins with the most deadly section on the entire mountain, the Autobahn. The name suggests speed, but on Denali, it refers to the terrifying ease with which a falling climber accelerates. At only 40 degrees, the slope looks deceptively traversable, leading some climbers to believe they can cross unroped. But this is a serious error in judgment that has claimed countless lives. In 2011, an experienced Italian climber fell 1,000 feet to his death here while choosing to traverse unroped ahead of his team. And even while roped, the Autobahn presents a deadly challenge. In that same 2011 season, an entire guided team of 4 fell, while 3 survived with major injuries. 1 climber was lost to the mountain. Beyond the Autobahn lies Denali Pass, a funnel for some of the most extreme weather on Earth, with winter temperatures here being recorded as low as -72.4 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1967, it was the site of the Wilcox Expedition disaster, the worst tragedy in the mountain's history. A superstorm of unprecedented ferocity pinned 12 college students on the upper mountain. Winds reached 100 miles per hour, with gusts estimated at 300, all while temperatures plummeted. 7 of the 12 climbers died. From the pass, the route winds toward a plateau known as the football field at 19,500 feet. At this altitude, the air is so thin that walking on level ground feels like sprinting uphill. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other becomes an impossible task. In 2011, a climber hit his limit here, collapsing and becoming completely non-ambulatory. He only survived after his teammates dragged him back down the mountain. The last 300 yards are a knife-edge traverse to the true summit. The ridge is festooned with massive cornices, overhanging waves of snow formed by the wind that project out over the 8,000-foot south face. One ill-placed step, and the cornice can collapse, leaving climbers riding a cascade of snow into the abyss. Eventually, after weeks of climbing, you reach the summit of Denali. Standing at 20,310 feet, climbers reach the highest point in North America. The view stretches across hundreds of miles of the Alaska Range, an endless expanse of ice, rock, and sky. But as climbers begin the descent in high spirits, they are unknowingly stepping into the most dangerous part of the entire expedition. It is here, on the descent, where 61% of fatal accidents occur on Denali. Many climbers forget that the summit is not the finish line, but merely the halfway point, and everything difficult on the way up becomes exponentially more dangerous on the way down. Having spent the last 14 hours above 17,000 feet, muscle glycogen is depleted, and dehydration sets in as the extreme cold and altitude impair cognitive functions. The brain, starved of oxygen, struggles with basic tasks. Judgment becomes clouded, and your specialized motor skills, the careful attention needed for cramponing, start to fail. This is why the Autobahn is the mountain's primary kill zone. On the way down, a single ill-placed crampon point on the hard blue ice can be fatal. Within seconds, a falling climber can accelerate up to 50 miles per hour, cartwheeling over rock bands and ice bulges toward the Peters Glacier thousands of feet below. Beyond the Autobahn, the entire treacherous route must be reversed in a state of total exhaustion. You must navigate the knife-edge West Buttress ridge while hypoxic, descend the 2,000-foot headwall on fixed lines before running the gauntlet of windy corners again. And finally, there is Heartbreak Hill. It is the mountain's final, cruel obstacle. After weeks of climbing to reach the highest point in North America and escaping the death zone, you are met with a final 600-foot uphill slog. It is here, mere minutes from the plane that will take you back to civilization, that climbers finally collapse, physically and psychologically broken. While Denali's history marks it as the deadliest mountain in North America, the risks have shifted over the decades. The 1992 season remains the darkest in the mountain's history. 11 climbers died that season, trapped by relentless storms, buried in avalanches, or lost to falls on the technical upper slopes. It was a wake-up call for the mountaineering community. Recognizing a sharp rise in fatalities, the National Park Service introduced a formal registration process that resulted in a staggering 53% reduction in deaths. Today, the wild nature of the mountain is balanced by strict oversight. Climbers must register at least 60 days in advance, providing a full resume of their experience and their proposed route. Upon arriving in Talkeetna, every climber must attend a mandatory orientation. Rangers review the latest mountain conditions, discuss safety protocols, and conduct rigorous gear checks. They ensure every team has the required safety equipment and waste management tools required for a clean and safe expedition. Only after these conditions are met do climbers receive their permits. Yet, even with these regulations, the mountain remains statistically lethal. 45% of deaths are still caused by falls, primarily on the Autobahn and the headwall. No amount of paperwork can account for a caught crampon or a sudden lapse in judgment brought on by hypoxia. Denali is not the highest mountain in the world, nor is it the most technical, but it is quick to punish anyone who forgets that on any mountain, survival is never guaranteed.